about it, Brunel. And on today's episode, we will be covering men's mental health part 2. And today we have a few guest speakers with us, and I would like you guys to introduce yourselves, please. Either one of you can go first.
Yeah.
Okay.
My name is Yasser. I graduated a few years ago, and I'm currently working in construction.
Okay. Nice to meet you, Yasser. This is the first time we met, isn't it? And nice to meet you too. I'm Dominik Havsteen Franklin. I'm a professor of practice in arts therapies at Brunel University, but I've been working in mental health services for about 20 years as a consultant in arts therapies. So that's probably enough about me. Yeah.
Okay, guys, and thank you for joining us today and taking part. How would you describe mental health in your own words? Maybe that's a good place to start. What is your perception of mental health? Because some people see it as a condition, some people see it as a disorder, some people also don't think it exists at all.
It's a really funny sort of word, isn't it? Because we say mental health and it sounds like we're talking about a sort of positive thing, like the health of our mental worlds.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it's one of those, it's much more difficult to say what's mental illness. What is that, what is it like to be feeling mentally unwell or at mental dis-ease? And I think that in itself, that we have mental health services, and of course they are sort of led by wanting to support people and help people. But it's much more difficult to sort of say, actually, today I feel down. Things are tough for me, and I'm having a tricky day. I feel unhappy. So I think all of that, that whole spectrum, from just feeling not at ease, not yourself, to feeling like you can't go on, and actually things are really tough and they feel lonely and isolated and so on. I think, that whole spectrum, is somewhere it's having a lack of mental health, let's say, a lack of support, a lack of connection. Yeah.
And yeah, so what would you say?
Yeah, so just to add to that, in terms of it being a spectrum, for me, it's maintenance of the brain, basically. The way I see it is, day to day, you may have some days where you feel down, some days you feel up. There may be some things that cause more pain than others. And like with anything, when something is broken, you need to maintain it, you need to fix it. And sometimes you need to find a method to fix it in the best way possible, not just a short-term fix, but something that can help you long-term. That's basically my view of it.
Can I just respond to that briefly? Because I think that's so, I think this is also really interesting right from the beginning, that, your own worldview influences, of course, the way you think about your own mental health,
Yes.
And Yasser, did you say you're an engineer? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? So you're using very engineering-like language. You construct things. You have a brain. If it breaks, and you fix it. This is your world. And I appreciate your world. I think it's a brilliant world. Someone who's a gardener might think very differently, or someone who is a computer scientist would think very differently, or so everyone has their own ways of constructing their own sort of healthy world, and each one has its own value. I have no problem with that at all. I think finding a way to meet that person where they are is the first step to mental health. It's like, yeah. But it's interesting. It's so interesting the language you used.
That's an interesting observation you've made, because me, myself, I studied psychology for my GCSEs and my A-levels, and then I did sociology for my undergrad, and I'm doing social work as my master's. And when I understand mental health, for me, it's like the different factors that contribute, because I don't think it's just biologically there's an alter in your brain. I think you can get triggered by your surroundings, your environment, your family. I think there's so many things that can possibly impact your mental health. It can be inherited, for example, or it might not be in your family at all. So yeah, the fact that that's crazy. Sorry, it's a really interesting way of putting it.
No, but I think that's absolutely right. I mean, there are, and it's what makes it so interesting, of course, is there are so many factors that influence mental health. They're even saying things like the kind of brain sort of gut axis has a huge influence on mental health, as much as the environment you live in, what you eat, the relationships you have, your physical health, just the things you read, the things you watch, all of these things, one way or another, have little influence, have sort of a drip feed towards what we're about as healthy beings. So absolutely, and of course there are some people are born with vulnerabilities. So if something traumatic happens, they're more likely to develop a severe mental health issue because there's a vulnerability there, and you can often trace this in the family. So they may need to look after themselves or be looked after, or both, more than some other people. So there are some sort of inherent factors. But absolutely right. There's so many factors involved in terms of mental health. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
and to add to that,
sorry.
Oh, sorry. And to also add to that, in terms of experiences that you've had in the past that may come afterwards, because you may have something that's happened in your childhood, and only until like your adulthood or your teen that trauma comes back. Because as you're going through those changes, as you're growing from a child to a teenager to an adult and beyond, your brain also changes as well, the way you think. What you knew about half your, just think about what you knew half your age right now, and then just think about it now. It's a huge amount of information and knowledge that's come in.
Yeah.
I also think that this topic has become a conversation amongst many people since following COVID and following lockdown, because I feel like during COVID and lockdown, we were forced to stay at home within these four walls and really have time to think. And a lot of people struggled with that. But then what I noticed following lockdown, when you go into a work environment, or even in your lectures, the first conversation at any work meetings, people check on well-being now.
They do, exactly. Yeah.
They do. So they're trying to slowly encourage that space to conversate about these things, which I don't think was there as such before.
Yeah. I mean, it was a low period for a lot of people, and I think it was brought into public consciousness, wasn't it? Because there was something about the way it was framed, like social distancing, so being distant from people that are close to you sometimes, you suddenly felt what that sort of feeling of separation is like, wanting to be close to people that you care about. It really accentuated what one of the biggest, I think, underlying factors for mental health is, which is kind of good relationships. And sort of having that kind of quality of contact. So people knew what it was like without that. What does that feel like? It's hard to imagine spending 3 months, 4 months, indoors, unable to see the people you love because they're too vulnerable. You know what I mean? That's hard. That's a hard place to be. Because people's relatives would die, of course, and not being able to say goodbye to them properly. All these kinds of things. It's really much more in the kind of public consciousness about what relationships mean now. And so people do check in a bit more. I think there's a sort of beginning to be a bit of a language around it that feels more acceptable. I think it's been a big media campaign. There's also lots of problems, of course, with media. In terms of the kind of ideals and what we must live up to, and sort of problematic stereotypes about men, for example. And
Why do you think that there is a potential gap in terms of where women are more prone and open when it comes to their mental health in comparison to men? I mean, I have a few ideas, but I'm not going to put it out there straight away because I'm the only female in this conversation at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying, why do more sort of men go to war than women? It's I think historically, my own view is, we still have some values which actually kind of really historic, which are way outdated, but they're somewhere still in our genes, that the men are the fighters, the women are the gatherers, in the same way as we still kind of, want sort of fat and sugar, for example. We go, oh, yeah, that's wonderful stuff. Because in prehistoric times, it's so scarce, there still are these kind of innate interests, let's say, that we have to manage, if you like. Because we've kind of, as a socially and relationally, and, we've kind of grown out of that, and technology's obviously influenced that quite a lot. But we still have these sort of very ancient sort of ways of thinking about society, which is much more tribal, much more competitive, much more threatened, and men sort of seem, feel sometimes they need to take up the responsibility of being that sort of, sort of more, let's say, sort of dominant physical aggressor, to protect themselves or others, which means not being attentive to your vulnerabilities, saying actually my own emotionality, my feelings, my sensitivity, the way that I connect with others in a more attuned, softer way, well, that doesn't fit into that picture. As a kind of warrior, I've got to be brave and stand up and be in charge. We've learned so much that this is so toxic. It's really, in so many ways, it's destroyed societies, it's destroyed whole countries, so but it's still present. It's still definitely present in the media,
I think it's those underlining social norms and social expectations from, like you said, years and years ago. It's generations. And even though times are changing, I feel like with any social issue, progress is always relatively very slow. It's happening, it's there, but it's not as fast paced, I guess. Does that make sense?
I think it is. I feel like it's an internal battle that particularly men have, and I think it's an important one to have, about yourself as somebody who is sound and grounded and can be robust and resilient, but can also be resilient and soft and caring and compassionate. This is a problem that men face. Being open about that,
And I feel, just to add to that, 100%, Dominic, you hit the nail on the head right there. There is a place for men to be robust, but to also be able to tap into their, emotional side and understand their emotions. And in terms of that also, because it's a relatively new that we're now reaching out into men's mental health as well, it's also allowing men to understand how to deal with their emotions, because understanding your own emotions is important, but how you manage it afterwards is also important as well. Just out of previous experience, I had dealt with some trauma before I started uni, carried it over during uni, and I realized towards the end of my bachelor's, after seeking counseling from the university, that I was projecting my trauma upon other people. So even though I was opening up about my emotions, I didn't know how to manage it. So I think that's also another aspect that we need to look into in terms of understanding men in terms of opening up, but also managing how they're feeling and how they're expressing how they're feeling, and getting to the root cause of why they're reacting in a specific way to a specific scenario.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Yeah, there's because one thing about knowing your emotions, isn't there, and sort of knowing where these, some of the more troubled emotions come from. But it's a very different thing, from expressing your emotions to being able to put them in context and see the reality around you. Being sort of living in the present, so to speak, really, and sort of realizing when the trauma was and what that was about. Because everybody's had traumas, everybody, and they hold them, in their worlds in one way or another. But it's not, being able to differentiate between that and what life offers you in the here and now is quite different. So it's not just about emotional expression. It's also about understanding the context of that emotional struggle, and where you are now, and kind of what opportunities you're faced with. So
it's about also being educated, but as well as being aware and knowing what interventions could be in place and what your support system could be provided. But like you did say, it is dependent on the individual and their setting, essentially.
Yeah. But it sounds like you had a good experience of counselling.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Honestly, I had never been before. So when I was offered this opportunity, I didn't know what to think at first, but I went with an open mind, and not saying to my shock, but to my like a positive surprise, kind of like when you find some money in your pocket, you're just like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
It's good, that's
Yeah.
there. I mean, not as much because of inflation, but you get what I mean. But I felt that I was able to really uncover parts of my brain that I hadn't really looked at in a while, and look at things from a different perspective, because I think counseling allows you to see things that you don't see within yourself, because I think within ourselves, it's harder for us to look inwards, but it's easier for somebody to look inwards towards us, if that makes sense. I don't know if you've experienced that, either of you, or anybody listening, where somebody can understand you better than you can understand yourself on certain things sometimes.
Yeah, there can be something very refreshing, very so eye-opening, and about someone seeing you, isn't there? There's something when somebody really tunes in with you, can see your experience, suddenly it sort of comes alive in a different way. It doesn't feel so much like you're on your own with it, or that it's something like, sometimes we have this kind of internal criticism that it's like nothing, or it's you're on your own with it, nobody possibly could understand, it's too complicated, it's shameful, I don't want to share this stuff. But all of that, sort of dissolves, when you have that opportunity just to be seen and heard in a really kind of attuned, kind of caring way. It really has an impact. It feels like, well, they know me better than I do. It's like, so it's, it can be quite a moving experience, profound experience, but it does also mean sort of challenging some of that internal dialogue, I think, sometimes, that we take on just partly because of, the way we're brought up, or, some of the criticism we experience, bullying, or,
I do think, though, I think with counseling, it's important that you find the right counselor for you.
Yeah.
That is a huge thing. And I do think if you do find the right counselor, they can provide that space where they encourage you and make you feel comfortable, in a sense, to open up. And I think maybe I'm wrong, but for me personally, in the past, the first session is always the hardest, because then it determines if you go back or not. And that's when the work really kicks in, to be committed to that. And also when you do go for counseling or interventions, talking therapy or CBT, you're opening up like this vulnerable, like, I don't know how to explain, like this vulnerable chamber in your brain that you keep closed for like an hour or so. And then you leave and you have to process all of that and digest it, which in itself could be a lot too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I've just been teaching today. We opened up an art therapy MA program, which is the first sort of clinical psychological therapy program we have in the university, and so we just opened up in September. But one of the learning points, as you've said, is because all of them need to be in their own therapy to be able to progress as therapists. They kind of learn what it's like from the kind of the client or patient perspective as well, because everyone's a patient to one sort or another. And some people, of course, have had to make changes. It's hard, because you still form a relationship, even if you're not happy with your therapist. There's still, and what you, but you need to be with the right person. You can feel that you're being heard, and they kind of see your worldview. If you see your world as a machine that needs to be fixed, then that's important. That's that's your experience. It's and if your therapist doesn't see that, then that's going to be hard to then have a relationship with that counselor. So yes, that's one of the things we've been we weren't expecting to encounter, but actually, finding the right therapist for the students has been really important. Yeah. That we also now have some of the trainees joining the counselling team, so they'll be offering art psychotherapy to some of the students.
That's actually amazing.
So
I think that's
nice.
quite good.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, we're really pleased about it. Yeah.
But it's true, because I think there are different types of therapies that you can take. And I mean, there's not just one. It's not one rule for all, one fits all. There are different options. And I think it's about being aware of what you have access to. That's important. And it's interesting that you said earlier that, if we somewhat don't shed a light on men's mental health and don't encourage them to talk about their feelings and their traumas, the same way we do with women, it does lead to toxicity. It does have a huge impact on society. It's not just the individual that is impacted by this. It's literally their surroundings, right? But for some reason, I think even like if you think about it, the way we talk to girls when they're younger in comparison to boys when they're like in school, for example, if a child does something, say they're a female and they're crying, you tend to use like a softer tone. Have you noticed that with children? But with a boy, you're not, I wouldn't say you're rough, but you're like, you tend to ask them, what's wrong? What happened? Whereas with a girl, it's kind of like, oh, are you okay? What are you Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've definitely seen this happen. Yeah. I think I do have a different feeling actually. Yeah, if my daughter, I have two sons and a daughter. I'm thinking if my daughter fell over somewhere, I was playing football or whatever she's playing. She used to be a wonderful gymnast actually. So if she was doing her gymnastics and she hurt herself, I probably would have a different feeling about that. So if my son hurt himself, I probably would give the same quality of attention.
Yeah.
But I would still be feeling like there's a sort of like a vulnerability, a different kind of vulnerability with my daughter. So yeah, maybe it's true. I mean, I still feel like I behave the same way, I think, but
you try actively,
I try.
consciously.
I actually consciously work at that. Yeah, because I think it's absolutely right. I mean, because my son has just the same feelings. If he falls over and hurts himself, he's still feeling the same things as my daughter. So, it's really, really important. But yeah. To treat them just the same way.
It's true. I mean, I noticed it with my nephew, for example. My brother would say that his mum is too like nurturing and like babies him. But the reality is the way she soothes my nephew is quite calming. Whereas my brother's kind of like, okay, you fell over, like you're gonna fall over again. Like this is life. You're gonna hurt yourself. You're gonna realize it hurts, and you won't do it again. So it has different impacts, but I think it's a good way to be with children that are boys now, because it makes it, I don't know, maybe it might have an impact on when they grow up and how they feel they can express themselves, because from a young age, boys are told not to cry. But crying is actually quite healthy, I think, to be honest.
Otherwise, then an outlet, there's a different outlet is formed in terms of how they express their emotions, which may or may not be positive.
It's true.
You'll find that if you suppress your emotions, you're much more. There's lots of evidence to support this. You're much more likely to get physical health problems. Yeah.
Correction, not positive. I meant negative, by the way.
Yeah. So if you suppress any feelings, to be fair, you're gonna have some physical. You're more likely to have physical like stresses and strains, which then form different kinds of problems with various different problems with your body. Even things like skin problems, ulcers.
Oh my God, I did not know that.
Yeah, so there's lots of physical problems that result from emotional health problems. So. Absolutely, yeah. You put yourself at risk by not feeling what you're feeling.
But then there's that idea of also wanting to numb it, so not wanting to deal with it, so turning towards, like, for example, I don't know, substances, and navigating that way in order to deal with what's going on mentally.
Yeah, and of course,
which is also.
Men do a lot. I mean, much more than women. They turn to alcohol. Say, well, actually, this is a way of me dealing with it, because I don't want to be feeling it right now. Thanks. So yeah, absolutely. And suicide, of course, is very high amongst men. I think there's maybe 3 times as many as women at the moment. So yeah, so it's there's this kind of way out option, saying I don't want this too much to feel.
I didn't know that. It's 3 times as many.
I think it's I think the most recent stats, between 2 to 3 times as many, depending on what stats you choose. But yeah, it's much, much higher amongst men than women, suicide rates. Yeah, but it's that thing about I can't manage it. I don't want to feel it. I want out. Whether it's by alcohol or suicide or something else. So that's, of course, the worst case scenario. It's like not feeling what you're feeling. Not having someone there to say it's kind of okay to feel what you're
But it's
feeling.
also that pressure to be expected to be that alpha male that is an all-rounder that has everything going for them. Does that make sense?
Tough, resilient, man of the house, breadwinner.
Yeah.
Can take a challenge. With his mates, always happy.
It's true.
It's that's a hard stereotype to live up to. I can promise you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's okay to have that, but I feel like one should also have so what I'm saying, it's good to be like that, but it's also good to not be like that. But you just need to make sure that you have a good support network. I think a good thought to have is, when was the last time you spoke to, your guy friends and just had a chat about how you're feeling? I mean, even having small conversations like that can go a long way.
Yeah, just like, how are you? Just checking in.
Yeah.
Can I ask, do males do that? Because from what I know, the ones that I have been around, they tend to not share when things are going on in their lives.
Yeah. I tell you one thing I've noticed is I prefer face-to-face conversations. Yeah, so more than a telephone call. If I want to have a chat with one of my mates, it would be, I'd have a chat, face to face. But whereas my wife will, be on the phone to, But I think so. It's different kinds of communication. That's my preference. I think maybe that's, yeah.
Yeah, for me, yeah, same, face to face. But then sometimes, let's say, that one of your friends has, something going on, or they're not well, or like they have an issue going on. Just a call, just check up on them. That something as small as that can go a long way. It can make them feel like, oh, okay, I feel like somebody cares about me. Even as small as a gesture. So that's another thing. I think overlooking what may seem like a small gesture for you may be a big thing for somebody else. So I'm going to use it. I'm going to use a bit of engineering talk here. Yeah, how all the engineers listening to this will know, energy is not created or destroyed. It's only transferred. But for these sort of gestures, it definitely is created. Because for me personally, when I would have something going on, or I would tell somebody, "Oh, I'm doing this right now," and then they would call me a week later. "Oh, how is this, by the way? How are you feeling?" That would mean a lot to me. And what do? They just called me for a minute just to check up. That's all they did, but it felt very good.
Yeah, exactly. It does. I mean, there's a little sort of, it's almost like the butterfly effect, isn't it? To use another sort of term, where you do get this little ripple, but actually has quite a big impact later on, in places where you wouldn't imagine it to. You might just recall that moment that kind of makes you feel good. You think, actually, you know what? I am supported. I've got someone there. I think the other thing that people do sometimes is they say, you say, oh, I'm having a tricky time, and they say, oh, don't worry, you'll get over it. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
And it really, I know they want to help. I really do know they want to help with all the best intentions, but it still leaves you feeling pretty like unhappy. You know what I mean? Like you're not really, no one.
It's that generic response.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very automatic, isn't it? You'll be fine, don't worry. It's not a big deal. But for them, it feels like a big deal. They feel upset, they're unhappy, and saying something like, I get it, you must be feeling really upset right now. Feels like a big deal. That's a very different way of having a conversation, and I think it's hard sometimes to accept how people are feeling, which is why it works so well with counselors, because they're trained to do this. But in a way, if we can build that language in everyday life, just tuning in and accepting people's feelings, allowing people to feel what they feel, whether they're happy or sad or whatever, would make a big difference to the world. Yeah.
So essentially, it's all about language and how we communicate with other people. I think it's quite, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe it's the younger generations that are becoming more aware of this. Does that make sense? Because for me growing up, even though I'm a female, I think my culture had a big impact on the way I was raised. Like I came from a home where we don't talk about things, we don't discuss our feelings or our emotions. And even till today, my parents do not talk about things. But because of the education that I've had and the people I've surrounded myself with, I will have those conversations that would be considered taboo or that are quite sensitive, and I think that's important. But I don't know. I mean, maybe culture is a factor. Generation could be a factor too. But that's just my view on things. That like they are changing. They are. However, I also feel that children shouldn't just be educated in school about mental health, but they should be, I don't know what's the word. They should be given the access to the support, like put it out there, not just in school, but what the NHS can provide, and it should be provided to them throughout the years, not just through like citizenship or PhD, because we go into high school, we go into university, we go into work, and we need to be able to have these conversations with essentially like our managers, for example, or the supporting staff, that we need the support. Does that make sense?
That it should be integrated within the course in itself. Sorry for interrupting, Dominik. So in terms of, you're going through the course, and like a good idea that I had is just personally, like when you're going for your degree, it'd be good for students to have like a I don't want to say compulsory because it sounds very forceful. Compulsory well-being check sounds a bit contradictory. Like I have to see if you're okay. But I feel like maybe an open door sort of policy where it's like, okay, so this week, kind of like, how some courses have a reading week. Okay, this is a well-being week. This is the time where you just reflect on how your term went. You can come and walk in and have this conversation, have a conversation, see how things are going. Yeah. I think if you do something like that, that can really help, because I think what shouldn't happen is you shouldn't have to split your mental health from academia or other professions, for example. I think they should be integrated to better understand and help your needs. I think, how you were saying, Dominik, you were saying how people turn to abuse substances to help them through work. I think that's one of the reasons why. It's because of the stresses of work and studies, and there's not really an understanding or a better term thereof, a dialogue to talk about how one person is feeling.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, Yasser. That there's a lot of attention given to performance. And it's, from my point of view, I think it's got a lot to do with thinking about, at the end of the day, you need to be productive member of society. Education becomes then sort of marketable, and we have these kind of chunks of knowledge that are worth money, and you go out there and you have this, you absorb it, then you put it out in another context, becomes somewhat mechanistic. And of course, we're human beings, and actually, if we really want to function effectively in the long term, we have to have well-being as part of the curriculum. I don't think is. And the other thing, I've been thinking about more and more, is that actually this is your first opportunity, a university environment, to think about this sort of social ecosystem, just how influential you can be. Here we are today doing a podcast, but actually this is part of a whole social ecosystem about how we're connecting, resonating, thinking together, getting new ideas out there. And it's, so in a way, we're modeling a better future in universities, an ideal environment to model it, We did do a small study with the business school where their undergraduate, the first undergraduate students, we did say it was compulsory unless people felt like they were very uncomfortable with the idea. We introduced some creative well-being exercises to help them reflect on what their journey had been like and how they were and how they could begin to build in some well-being sort of awareness about themselves and others. And thinking really about working environments, thinking about what happens after this as well. So things that will carry you through into the long term. So stuff that's integral to their learning, interpersonal skills, communities. We had actually really good results. I mean, we did a survey, we did some outcome measures. So the sense of psychological safety was hugely increased, so the sense that they feel safe to be open and explore and not judged was really important. This is a big thing in education. There was they said it was very fitting with the curriculum anyway, because there's a lot of stuff around organizational development and business, and they said actually this feeds into that. They thought delivery actually was really exciting. So I think it was like 75% said actually this is a great way of delivering education. So there were new things, innovations coming out of this about, okay, what happens exactly as you said, Yasser, it's not rocket science, but why isn't it happening more? It's like,
Yeah. And out of curiosity, what are these creative well-being exercises that were done?
Yeah. So we did. So actually, I'm glad you asked because so I spent a couple of years working with some of the teams that were really hit hard by COVID in the NHS, and we learned quite a lot about that. So there were teams that were really in a difficult state. Basically, they've been like a lot of pressure on, under-resourced. They felt like the decisions were being made for them, disempowered. And I noticed that like there were a lot of things that students felt like they weren't in control of, and that people's mental health wasn't fantastic. They didn't feel part of a community. Some students really do, and other students don't.
Yeah.
And this seemed to my mind to be parallel to some of the things that were happening in the NHS at the time with some of the teams. So some of the exercises we were doing with those teams, we were things like very simple exercises like closing your eyes and imagining your group as a garden environment. Okay. Yeah. So what does that feel like and look like to walk into this environment where, what is it? Is it dense? Is it spacious? Is there a fence? Is there no fence? Does it feel warm and inviting? Does it feel cold? So you begin to get a metaphor for your kind of community environment, and then positioning yourself in that space, and then really looking at the strengths of that environment. So using a lot of metaphors. It's quite playful, and it felt quite like safe to do it, because you weren't sort of looking at people's traumas and struggles as such. You were using a lot of metaphor around this. So we did a bunch of it, like a few exercises like this, and really took people into an emotional, what we'd call embodied states of really feeling themselves in that space, and the way they connect with other people, and then finding ways of talking about that together. So really ticked a lot of boxes in terms of helping people to feel more open about talking about their emotional experience with other people. What it's like to be in a group. So it's a great. So that was one of the exercises we did, was the garden sort of ecosystem. Yeah.
That's really interesting, because it's like you allow the individual to highlight their perception of what they're experiencing and they're feeling, and then you follow that up by giving them the space to like talk about it, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then they made small drawings. So each one made a small drawing. And then the facilitator makes a drawing of all their drawings together. So you have one big ecosystem, with their. So.
But that feels like less judgment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
that feels like judgment's kind of out the window on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what people said. I mean, that's the actual measures. When we did psychometric measure before and afterwards about psychological, people said they felt more open and free to sort of give ideas and didn't feel judged so much. Which is a great result. I think that's what learning is about. I think it's about generating ideas, being a bit analytic, sharing, working together, being reflective, and feeling safe to do so.
Yeah. Dominik, do you mind talking a bit more about art therapy? Just because on my placement, one of my children was provided the opportunity to do art therapy. But their guardian was against it because they felt that art therapy was only beneficial for children, for example, in primary school, younger years.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yasser's face is making a face like, no, that's not true. That can't be possible.
No. I actually, sorry to interject. I actually am intrigued by this, because I do feel like as I've gotten older, everybody needs to have some kind of creative outlet. I think people overlook how much creativity helps. Because I just remember like stuff when I was younger. Like I would play with Lego and I would make all these buildings and everything. I would make storylines with all the toys that I had. And I'm just thinking about it. Yeah. That creativity, where is that imagination? Where does that go?
Exactly.
And it's quite interesting how when that goes, then the way I see it is, when something goes, then something else needs to fill it, right? And sometimes it's not always good things that fill it, So I think I'm intrigued by this art therapy, so I'll.
I really like what you've sort of brought to the table about this, because I think there is something about, what we lose when we grow up, in effect. Because there is that sort of playful curiosity that somewhere, as the pressure, particularly in some universities, to kind of be more productive and to perform well, that kind of like playful, creative exploration, which should be an absolute essential in education. Somewhere we find there's too much pressure to have that time. It feels like a luxury suddenly. But if you're feeling, what can tend to happen, you'll know this from your psychology training, when you begin to feel down, you begin to get these repetitive thoughts. Yep. And they're circular, and they get stuck, and you can't get out of it, and there's no imagination, things look bleak, and just trying to break that circle. We can begin to do that partly because, what we're not aware of, first of all, is the depth of that feeling, and sometimes some of the vulnerabilities behind that, but also some of the kind of, like I said, some of the opportunities for connection. So if we begin to, and it's particularly if we think about our bodies hold a lot of emotions. Yeah. And so when we mobilize that through anything, but particularly through creative arts, we begin to express something more than what we think we're about. And then we begin to engage with new dimensions about ourselves, just as you said, Yasser, about
really interesting that you say that.
Learning more about, what were you going to say?
No, sorry, I just said it's really interesting that you say that, because as you're saying it, I was thinking it, because it's as if we unlock our emotions and our feelings subconsciously without realizing that we're doing it.
Exactly. And if you do it, because art therapy uses metaphor a lot, it feels quite safe to do it. So if you're using color or shapes, or you have dialogues between different kind of elements, for example, it's very playful. And people feel a bit might feel a bit shy at first, let's say. But once you get into it, you realize it's a very, very rich world. You have a very rich world, and this then supports your mental health, because you're able to kind of be more flexible, move around things, see things from different perspectives, other people's points of view. Feel a bit more resilient, because you don't get stuck back in those patterns. There's cyclical stuck patterns that feel very bleak. There's no creativity or imagination there. So, so it really has scope for bringing a new life into your world. This is about you, essentially. Yes, it is very similar to, it's a psychological therapy, so it's based on the premise of kind of normal verbal psychotherapy, but you just have this added dimension, of the arts, painting, drawing, sculpting, whatever you kind of begin to find a language with. It is a sort of a language that's sort of different to verbal language. It's about, how you begin to make a mark, an impression with your body, in effect. So we can have a new sort of dialogue, especially in academia, where we can be so much in our heads, can't we? We can really be reading a lot and digesting it and putting it down, and very cognitive. Almost lose sight of my body. I forget it's there.
It also might be a good intervention for someone who struggles to speak and to communicate.
Absolutely.
It's a different option, and it sounds, from what you're describing, a very unique outlet, to be honest with you. I mean, coming from me, I've had about 7 to 8 therapists, and art therapy, I remember being 18, that was when I had my first therapist, and she wanted me to draw in these frames of what I felt and play with Play-Doh. And at that point, I think when I was 18, I was like, what is this? Yeah. But as I've gotten older, I'm like, I have a different perception on it, especially following this conversation.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. It is very interesting. I think another thing also is we need time to really contemplate, because of all this information we're getting all the time. And dare I say it, and I'm guilty of it as well, with these always taking our stream time, the amount of information we've got coming in, we need to have time to have information coming out as well. One thing that is pretty good is journaling and writing down how you think. Yeah. So how people 100%. Can't explain, we need to have time to, what's the word, contemplate and really really think about like what's happened today, like really like look over what's going on. Because sometimes what happens is we get so far into the forest, you can't really see the trees anymore. You just see like just chaos. So taking a step back and allowing yourself to really just look over what's going on, I feel it's very crucial to do.
So I have a question, because it was interesting that you said that. A lot of young boys and men are encouraged as their outlets to be some form of like physical activity, whether that be going to the gym or football or rugby. But do you ever feel like that then somewhat pushes aside them actually being able to express themselves, because they're letting it out, but not really dealing with the core issues of any like anxieties or anger or any trauma? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
It makes sense. Yeah.
it does make sense. So that, okay, so that, what I was saying in terms of long-term and short-term fixes, one shouldn't do something just to do it, just to, brush it under the rug, so to speak, but to do it because it actually does help them, and once and it encourages them to, really find and seek help that will facilitate them improving their mental health. I find personally, when I do these physical activities, it does help, even on days where it doesn't. But then afterwards, I do like to contemplate and just think to myself. So what I would advise to those who go and they still feel down is to ensure that they do take the time to think for themselves, give themselves space, because I think, how we always say we need to ask people for boundaries, but we need to have boundaries within ourselves as well. In terms of what we allow ourselves to think. If we're just stuck in front of things all the time, because if you think about it, you wake up, let's say somebody's working 9 to 5, they go into the office, they work, lunch, maybe talk to a colleague. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm on my phone, go home, on the train back, maybe on the bus back, phone, then get home, phone or TV or something. So we're consumed by content all the time. So instead of being consumed by content, we need to, express our own content.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think I agree with you. I think finding a way of just reminding yourself you're a human being with your own thoughts, imagination, feelings, activities, and so on is really important. Some people, of course, are very drawn towards like sports.
Yeah.
And and I think that can be hugely helpful. There's so many health benefits, from some sort of physical exercise, and you're often doing it with other people,
Yeah.
So it's no, often a team sport, or even if you're going to the gym, you're going to have some quality of contact and be in some shared space and have some sort of resonance. Just like when we were talking about earlier about going in to see a counsellor and someone sort of gets you, they can sort of see where you're at. Being in environments where people kind of get where you're coming from, really sort of can put themselves in your shoes is important for anybody. So in sports environments, you kind of get that. But you're absolutely right. If there are sort of emotional struggles and, they're big emotional struggles, and when you walk away from the gym, you have to face those things again. You've got to start paying attention and think of other options as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This is where art therapy comes in, you see.
No, I would love to go for art therapy now.
Yeah. Well,
I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think obviously it's not one shoe fits all. And everyone has a different experience and their perceptions are different. For me, I felt a real difference in terms of my health when I used a combination of things in order to get better. So I was doing talking therapy, but I was also journaling. And it wasn't a case of like journaling every day. It would be like whenever I felt overwhelmed or I felt an emotion that I didn't want to feel, for example. So I was doing that. And then I was doing a lot of reading to understand why my brain thinks the way my brain thinks, if that makes sense. And at the same time, I was going to the gym too, and I was trying yoga. So I was trying a combination of different things in order to improve my health. But I generally believe that therapy is needed. I think everyone should go to therapy. I think we all carry traumas, whether we know them or not. And I think some people are just scared of it, to be honest, scared of therapy and scared because it isn't easy. It does unlock a lot, but I generally feel that when you go more each session, it gets easier and your perception changes and it kind of feels like a weight off your shoulder. I also don't think someone should go to therapy just once in their life. I think, throughout your life, you should. That's just my opinion of it. I have friends who make fun of me saying that I've had 7, 8 therapists. Maybe it's not working, but I actually generally think it is working, to be honest with you. I'm now able to recognize when I need that extra support or when I need to go and send for example, my personal tutor an email saying, hi, I think I need to go back for counseling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I'm just thinking about the kind of conversation we're having today. It sort of feels like there's something very buoyant and very alive about it. And my feeling is we've kind of been through our own journeys. Do you know what I mean? So I know we were still on our journeys, but I kind of get the feeling that, yes, we've experienced something that's important to us. And we've got something to say about it. We do have some different ideas and thoughts about what it's like, being in pain and struggling, as well as what it's like being happy and connected, because I guess is why you invited us and we're having these kind of conversations. So to my mind, I can, I don't know what's happened and what your history is, but I can feel the benefit, if you see what I mean. It's, can I say that?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Go on. Sorry.
No, I think that's, yeah. I suppose what I was going to say is, to my mind, I think there are probably, if we're going to go back to that question of mental health, I think there probably are I tend to think of these 4 dimensions, really. I think there is this sort of emotional, interpersonal relationship world really needs attending to. I do think the physical body needs really looking after. I also think the kind of culture and community and society really needs looking after. And I also think you really need to look after what you're good at, your kind of skills, your kind of competencies, the things that make you offer something to the community, So I think, my view is if people are attentive to those 4 things, you're going to be happy, or at least you're going to have improved mental health, let's say.
That's actually very true. That's a very good tip, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we go on to some final closing thoughts?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say, don't be too hard on yourself. Make sure you give yourself time, because you may not see the benefit immediately, but in the long term, it will help to have these outlets that will improve your mental health, and to also ensure that that there are services and people that you can talk to, and that you're not alone in this. We all have things that we deal with, and that's not to make anybody's trauma any less, but it's to encourage those that, hey, we're all in the same boat here. Let's help each other so we don't drown.
Great words. I mean, there's not much more I could add to that, because I think that's beautifully said. So I guess I could say something about it's important to kind of to breathe, to be in the present, just to take note of what is here, what is present, to feel what you feel, as we said before, really to know it's okay to have those feelings, and try to reach out, really to say, if you're not feeling okay, to tell somebody that, to say that I'm having a bad day, can we have a conversation? Can we just have a chat, because things are quite tough right now? Those kinds of conversations, really hard to kind of reach out like that, but so important, But likewise, it goes the other way on too. If you're not sure about how someone is, just to check in with them. So easy. Doesn't take 2 minutes. So yeah.
Just to drop a little message.
Just to drop a little message, yeah.
Just
a little gift.
Little notification.
Exactly.
I mean, I would say, for me, I think, if you are a Brunel student listening to this episode, please, please, please contact your personal tutor. Yohai Hakai is mine, and God bless his soul. I call him my uni dad. I call him my uni dad. I go to him for
I'll tell him
everything.
that. He'll be very honest.
I'm being very honest. Like the first time I said it to him, bless him, he looked so taken back by it. And if you can't contact your personal tutor, I'm sure the well-being and the support team on campus are more than willing to help you, and they're literally there. I will be attaching different other services that you can also get access to, as well as email addresses that Brunel can support you with too. So thank you guys for listening. If you would like to take part, please drop us a DM and stay tuned for more. Thank you guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.